All right. The next panel we've got is physical security with Bitcoin. We're going to be joined by Jameson, Lopp. We've got Rodolfo. We've got Florian. And we've also got Rigel Walsh. And I'm going to be moderating this. So welcome them all to the stage. All right. This is interesting because Jameson took me to shoot my first ever gun 2 years ago. So we might get into that now. Okay, guys, welcome. So physical security in Bitcoin, super important. Jameson, we've talked about it a bunch of times. We're going to have a bunch of different people listening today. I know we've got a room full of hardcore Bitcoiners, but we might have people on the live stream who are kind of new to this. So for a starting point, for some people, this is going to be the first time they're going to be managing their own money. What is the minimum starting point for security that you would start somebody new to Bitcoin with?
Well, I think the trickiest thing in this space is it's very hard to predict what is going to happen in the future. And what at least happened to a lot of us who got into this years ago, I think, did not imagine was how quickly everything was going to evolve. And just from a security standpoint, you don't want to have a level of security that is just enough for your current situation. You want to have a level of security that is enough for 10 times what you think you might need. Because especially in this space, the volatility is not just with the exchange rate; it's with absolutely everything else related to the entire ecosystem. So if you're going to be public, if you're going to be talking about being interested in this space, then you need to imagine what level of security you might need in a few or more years when people are going to start looking and saying, hey, this person's been talking about Bitcoin for so many years, and they start doing the math in their heads. Okay, so everything I do right now, because you're aware, is probably wrong. So this isn't just about, hi, here's a picture of me with Jameson in Latvia. So still, even coming into Bitcoin, though, this is a new thing to a lot of people. So planning ahead is great, but I still think, Rodolfo, where would you be starting people off, and what's the journey you would be taking them on and the key lessons that you would be wanting them to learn?
I think privacy is, I think, one of the most important things, especially coin privacy. So if people don't know what you have, it's much harder to be a target. So keep that private. Don't go to Bitcoin conferences. And then backup. Most people screw themselves out of their coins more than they get robbed. And then start becoming very acquainted with the idea of having to learn how to be your own bank. It's not something that we have had to do for probably a couple centuries now to hold the value that we own ourselves. That comes with a lot of responsibility and risk. So you really have to learn and sort of keep on increasing your security protocols according with what the next price is going to be. Because Bitcoin moon.
See, so privacy and security are really two sides of the same coin. I know this is the security panel, but if you go to the extreme of one, you may not need as much of the other. So if you have extreme privacy and no one even knows that you're involved in anything crypto related, then you're much less likely to be targeted by anyone in the first place. Whereas I'm kind of on the opposite side of things, where I've been very public about my interest in this space for many years, and I didn't want to just drop off the face of the earth and no longer be able to interact with people. So I have to go a lot more extreme on the security side.
Which involves tweeting pictures of you with AR-15s?
Yes.
As many as possible.
So anyone who's deep in the security space knows that security through obscurity is just a feel-good thing. If I could not be public about the steps that I take for my privacy or my security, then they're actually not that secure. Because then if someone can just find out what steps I'm taking and then use that against me, then I haven't really protected myself. I'm just hoping that no one finds my secrets.
Right. Florian, on the technology side, I still kind of want to get to the point where, what are the basics that people should be doing, and what is the kind of end goal? So what's the starting point with your physical security?
Yeah, obviously, we had good points already made by Jameson, and keep a low profile is like the most important thing after all, and yeah, know your tools probably is also important, like try different tools, but don't experiment with like real money, play with things that you can afford to lose, try different tools, try different hardware wallets, try to run your own node, see what matches your skill profile. What Jameson basically said earlier today also, like that's a complete new responsibility that people suddenly have, like, and it's still, even for me, when people ask me what's your favorite hardware wallet, it basically changes every 3 months. It's cold card obviously, but the different releases. No, but I'm really saying it's overwhelming. It can be overwhelming. Start small. Use open source tools. Check for developers having a good history, building great tools. And review your procedures. It's also a very important practice. So like the actual tools aren't that important, but understand what they do. Not only do backup, also test the restore procedure, because otherwise it's pointless.
Don't depend on single points of failure, right? Because aside from, robberies and things like that, if you get hit by a bus, you want probably your family to get what you had. I can't understate enough, like most people screw themselves out of their Bitcoins. It's just a thing that happens a lot.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I tend, since at least a while, always when I board a train, I kind of have to review, and it happens suddenly, and I don't even have to think about it, but I start reviewing my restore procedures. My wife and family, do they have clear instructions what to do? A good resource for that is there's a checklist by Pamela Morgan that you can look up. It's free. It's basically a document where you write down where your seats are stored. If it's maybe it can be at a notary. What kinds of assets you have, so that can also have a clear picture of what you have, and yeah, that definitely helps. So, and for me, every boarding of a plane results in that procedure getting reviewed.
Rigo, hi. So one of the things we have with, say, bodyguards protecting the physical security of people is they have protocols and procedures they have to follow to protect them. Obviously, you've now started talking about the protocols and procedures you have for yourselves. How often do you think people should be reviewing this? And also, do you think people should be discussing this with other people to get advice, or do you think you should keep it all to yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to start off with, well, first off, for those of you who probably don't know who I am, my background is I did 10 years in the police, and the last year and a half of that I was protecting a head of state as part of their residential security team. And I think like something you learn in police work in general that's quite applicable to here is, look, you're never going to be physically invulnerable, right? If you talk to people that are burglaring houses, right, you can't make it impossible for someone to get in. It's always an angle. The angle is not to be invulnerable, it's just to make yourself a less appealing target than the next guy, right? They're going to drive down the street, this house has got an alarm, it's got window locks, let's just go next door, the easier target, right? So it's viewing it from that perspective, but to speak to your question as well, I think very important that you have procedures like in the army and the police, they really emphasise drilling, or what's called TOWITs, right? Where you get a weapon and you just do the basic steps that you need to go for, like a reload, or if there's a stoppage or something, you go that over and over and over and over and over until it's muscle memory, right? And so you need to view your security procedures in a similar way, where you need to rehearse it, and again, if there are other people involved, work out a team and work through it as a team, because when it happens, like when you have someone's going to come and try and take you hostage or come to your house, right? Emotions are going to take over. Your mind is not going to be thinking rationally. So you've got to have it imprinted in that kind of reptilian part of your brain where it just happens automatically. So your disciplined rehearsal of this thing over and over and over, I think, is a very important thing. And like looking at Jameson's list of physical attacks without knowing all the details, I think it's somewhat apparent that a lot of these guys did not have a contingency plan, or they haven't thought of, okay, so if a guy comes to the door now with a gun, where am I going? I'm out the back door. Am I going to do this? Am I going to do whatever it's going to be? They hadn't had a plan rehearsed, and I think that's very important. And as you guys have said, something that a lot of people should start thinking about what their contingency plans for these things are.
Yeah, I mean, can I be attacked. So, like, say somebody's attacking you, can they take it from me in that situation, right? If you have a setup where they can't, I mean, there's nothing for them to take aside from making your life hell for a day or two. But they cryptographically cannot take it from you.
I mean, it's important to think as well, like hostage taking is quite a logistical, there'll be some reconnaissance that's done beforehand. To be able to execute something like that requires a team. There's a lot of working parts, right? So if you can complicate it, the difficulty exponentially raises with every little thing you do. So even the small stuff that you have in place to make it a little bit more difficult is going to really help you out. And again, the plan is not to cover every edge case. It's just to be less appealing than the guy on Twitter posting with like Lambos and where he's going to meet up with people for drinks from his trading group or something like that. That's the sort of stuff, and they're going to be the targets, right? So as long as you're not falling into that, you're winning a lot of the battle, I think.
So this is a change in dynamics because this is a problem that has never really existed before, except for real mainstream celebrities. People who have such a high profile and are known to be highly wealthy that for them, an expenditure on actual armed guards and trained security personnel is pocket change. But now what we've done is we've changed the incentives to the point that it actually makes sense for these criminals who are willing to risk their own lives with physical attacks. They're now targeting people with much smaller net worth because the effective payoff may in fact be a lot higher than attacking someone who is known to be a multimillionaire but mostly in illiquid assets. And so what we're really doing is we're trying to distill a huge volume of security information, which basically comes down to multi-layered security. First thing being try not to be a target in the first place. Second thing being hardening your home and your basically daily physical location to slow down an attacker who might be determined enough to try to get in. And third, having some sort of active defense knowledge of what you would do if an attacker did manage to breach all of those defenses and you find yourself in an actual physical confrontation.
So Jameson hosts a page, is it on GitHub, with the record, with a breakdown, like a chronological breakdown of all the physical attacks on people who've been kidnapped or tortured for their Bitcoin. And it's worth going through to see the number of scenarios. I'm going to ask a mildly controversial question related to that. If you've locked up your Bitcoin with such strong security procedures that they can't take them from you, they might not believe you and then start torturing you for a day or two, which is going to be obviously thoroughly unpleasant. Would you recommend that perhaps they have a little bit of Bitcoin available to perhaps fend them off?
The problem with this is that you get into speculative territory. Having a duress wallet may appease some attackers, and they may be like, okay, I'll take this and go. Or it may just infuriate other attackers, especially if they have a good idea that you're only giving them, change, essentially. And, once an attacker has committed to physical violence, I think it's pretty clear that for them there is no line, and I would not bet my life on the fact that an attacker only wants to hurt me and wouldn't go so far as to completely end my life so that there's no witness.
So what's the next step then to be prepared for a physical attack? I'm from the UK. We have quite different gun laws from, say, in the US. But I know yourself and you, Rodolfo, you're pro-gun. So what are the different scenarios? Would you recommend, say, for somebody like myself in the UK who can't legally own a gun? And then what would you recommend in, say, states where you can legally own a gun? What security procedures would you recommend to be in place?
Very sharp chopsticks. So if you can't secure yourself, which most people can't, you're going to have to outsource that security somehow. If it's financially not doable in that space, like in that locality you're in, you might want to move. And then you can sort of sort out ways in which it's provable. Because an attacker is not going to want to go from a break and enter to a kidnapping charge to a murder charge, right? There's a lot there for these guys, right, to lose. And if you're making this attack expensive, right, like the more expensive to attack you that it is, the higher end the attackers are going to be, and these guys are not stupid. So they don't want to add more heat on them if it's provable, right, that you can't. So I am also not a fan of decoy wallets. I'm a fan of the binary system here. It's like, you know what, you brick the device, that's it. There's nothing that can be taken. You might get punched a lot. They probably not gonna kill you. You can't quote me on that.
I think somebody had a drill in their knee, so I was a bit like,
Yeah, that's the thing, right? But if the device is literally destroyed, there is no way of getting the funds. They're not gonna, now that you have, drills everywhere, take you somewhere else to go get it, right? It's over. And then you can use companies to co-sign your transactions. So, if they know you're in duress, it's just, there is no simple answer. You're going to have to search your dark place and figure out, where, how far you're willing to go and how you want to solve it.
It's like you said, there is no way to be invulnerable. There's no way you will ever have a perfect setup. Even the most highly protected, like political figures in the world don't have perfect protection. They just have a level of protection that's so high that almost no one has sufficient resources to breach it.
And people physically attacking you and torturing you is not the only scenario we have to worry about, Florian, is it? So what are the other kind of reason we need to consider our personal or physical security?
I think in the first place it's really always important to avoid getting tortured in the first place. Build, like Jameson said, build a couple of layers around you. Personally, I have a security background. I spent a decade securing infrastructure, also for big enterprises, and from that coming into cryptocurrency, for me a good method that basically anybody can adopt is placing canary tokens around you. Basically, it's a little bit of honeypots. That's what I do in my network, what I do for a couple of clients. Sounds complicated, isn't at all. It's basically you put a Word document within all your other documents that says seed phrase for whatever, and if some attacker opens that document or copies it, you get an email triggered by that document. Basically, it's a good kind of ransomware if you want so. Another interesting option could be in the future new type of multisig transaction. Basically, if you maybe even have been tortured and someone stole your Bitcoin from your hardware wallet, that somehow managed to access it, that you can actually cancel that transaction, revert it, or whatever. That's another option that is possible. But I think in the first place, you always want to try or be notified when someone is starting to poke in your direction.
The next question's for all of you, and we'll work down the line, and you can add to it if you feel things are missing. But we've got a bunch of Bitcoiners here, and a bunch will be streaming in. What are the most common mistakes you see people make, and the things that make you kind of gasp? And maybe add in there some things that people maybe do that they aren't aware are kind of stupid.
The most common mistakes are creating single points of failure, and the problem here is that there are so many different ways to create single points of failure that this is one of the reasons why just a day or two Casa released our protocol, essentially outlining our wealth security model, and it's like 50 pages of ideas about different potential attacks that we've thought through and how we try to mitigate all of those. And it's not just active attacks, right? It's your own mistakes that you can make. There are so many decisions to be made in a setup where you are your own bank that many of these decisions can essentially act as what we call foot guns, which is you make the wrong decisions, go down the wrong path, and then maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but at some point in time, you have essentially enabled yourself to destroy all of your money, and no one can help you get it back.
I think people sort of need to work through the whole thing that all sort of Bitcoiners go through, and sort of try to do all this stuff yourself, right? So knowledge and security really go hand in hand. So, you learn like what is a seed, how do you protect a seed, ways to protect a seed, and then sort of like you sort of grow into self-validation and your node, and sort of like you try to just walk yourself through and do it yourself. Take a whole year doing this stuff because it's much harder to trust entities, even security companies, when the item is a bare instrument, right? I mean, this just never existed before, that you could take the whole thing in 24 words and it's gone. Before you had to bring a winch to take the gold out of the place, and it's heavy and it costed a lot to do it. Bitcoin is extremely liquid. So you really have to learn how it works and how to use it.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of errors happen around tooling. I think it's already a blessing that we have hardware wallets. We have a couple of standards that you can rely on. Obviously, like protecting the seed is important. Like the most common errors I see when people ask me via email or Twitter to look into some thefts or issues are really like very basic attacks, like always looking for the weakest links. It's not somebody doing any network level attacks or denials of service. Obviously that happens, but like one of the worst incidents ever only was recently, where someone basically lost 200 BTC because he thought that keeping the seed phrase as backup in his Gmail account in the draft folder would be a good idea. And he was blaming Ledger and was streaming on Twitter and then asking me via email what to do, because I tend to be open to help people. I'm technically curious, and obviously when someone claims there's a vulnerability with a hardware wallet, it raises my attention. And so, yeah, I was walking through the whole process that he did, and basically, as it turned out, he had a bad idea for the backup location of his seed. So that's it's tooling, misconceptions, and yeah, it's a lot of IT responsibilities that non-IT people suddenly have.
But this is still an evolving space too. Is it like people are so creative, they're always finding new ways to shoot themselves in the foot. Yep. And every time someone does that, and at least when they're public about it and they share the knowledge of what they've learned a very difficult lesson from, then the rest of us can write that down and say, okay, don't do that. But how long is that going to continue happening? Potentially forever, yep. Though hopefully it slows down as we expand through the space of all the ways you can screw up.
Fortunately, we thank you for your sacrifice and your coins, and now they're part of the proof of burn, and they'll never be sold or match the price.
I think I'd just add, for lack of a better term, kind of situational awareness. Like, I really think, for lack of a better way to put it, Bitcoin's a lifestyle, and you need to think about this in a holistic way about, what does it mean about my general routine and what goes on in my life and things like that there, and maybe, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? And with Bitcoin, you don't have to deal with banks and transaction fees and things like that. But part of being your own bank is having your bank security, right? And so, people have to think about what are the implications for my whole life about this thing here, outside of just how you interact with a wallet or online. How does this impact all the issues we've talked about here? So it's a different way of viewing the world, I guess. Being a bit more security conscious, being a bit more paranoid. And I think like this demographic is in relatively good space about awareness of that. But I think like the general crypto market has a very long way to go about developing that culture that's really going to enable people to be custodians of their own funds.
None of you mentioned safety on boating trips.
Yeah,
seems to be a common problem in Bitcoin. Okay, another thing that I've been thinking about is that in this future world of hyper-Bitcoinization that we talk about and hope for and may happen, people are going to be forced to use Bitcoin. They won't have an option out. And they might not be the kind of people like us who have gone down the rabbit hole who care about all this. Are there scenarios like this where you believe custodial solutions are an okay form of security?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the easy way out, and it very may well be that the majority of people choose the path of least resistance, which means they won't have any privacy, they won't have much security, but they will be able to use Bitcoin or at least use Bitcoin IOUs through third parties. And while that makes, I think, most of us in this room cringe, the freedom of this network and this protocol is that people can choose how much effort they want to put into it and choose what level of privacy and security they're willing to obtain on their own.
I mean, but this entities will also be massive honeypots too, right? They might even be able to skip getting hacked because maybe they're very good, but they're still going to be susceptible to government intervention. Maybe the government is going to go and hit their loan of last resort from this entity that has the pile, right? So there is no perfect answer for any of this stuff. It's going to be a little bit of a Wild West for quite some time.
Right, okay. As we come into a close, I think it might be useful for people to, if each of you could recommend, say, some resources where people want to learn more about security, where would you direct them to? Starting with lopp.net.
Yes, there are security resources on lopp.net. Actually, I already have the full article written. It hopefully will be published in the next few weeks, but I have another 5,000 word guide. This one will be to specifically home defense security best practices for those of you who really want to turn your home into a castle.
It's the map to the citadel.
I've seen that castle. Any resources?
So, in case, not really. I mean, you have to just Google this stuff. There is no perfect source of anything. I think you should really try to understand Bitcoin well and try to understand how to use Bitcoin well. Back up your stuff and use a hardware wallet if you have real money.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Definitely use a hardware wallet. Get familiar with it. There are good resources describing typical challenges to get started. I think you have a great page. Jameson's page really is very exhaustive. So for starters, might be a little bit too scary. But get a Trezor, experiment with Ledger. These devices tend to be very cheap nowadays. When I bought my first Trezor, I think it was a 2-for-1 offer. I paid $140 in BTC for it. It ended up being like €1,000 per device. It was a first edition in 2013, 14, something like that. So nowadays it's like €35, maybe €40, and it's well worth it. And the typical hardware wallets available, like Trezor, Cold Card, and the Ledger, for example. I can recommend all of them.
Yeah, kind of put me on the spot. No resources immediately popped to mind. I think what Lopp's got there is a good starting point. I think just for the layman, a good way to think about this is we're all familiar with what a fire drill is like, or those sort of emergency procedures. Start thinking and mentally planning that sort of stuff for some of these contingency scenarios. It might be a bit scary for people, but it is a reality. And again, start developing that mindset. Don't get too paranoid, but where I come from, you're always walking down the street and thinking, if someone jumped out and attacked me now, where would I go? Where would I, what would I do? And develop that constant situational awareness. I think is probably the best step that a lot of people can take.
All right. Well, thank you guys. That was amazing. Can we have a warm round of applause? Right. It is lunch now. Before everyone heads off, I see you walking out the back. Just a reminder. If we want to get going again at 3:30, try and get back for, say, 3:25, because we've got amazing speakers, and it's a bit rubbish when the room's half empty or people are still walking in. So please try and do that. Enjoy your lunch. See you after that.
The most dangerous game.
There's only 100,000 rounds of ammo in the basement, but